Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dawn McKnight, and I am the Executive Director for the Independent Association of Home Instead Franchisees. And on behalf of IAOHIF, I would like to welcome you to the second of our webinar series titled Workers' Comp 101. This webinar is with Dennis Powers of InZone Insurance. InZone is a vendor partner of the association. Before we begin, just one housekeeping item to share with you. If you have a question, you may type it into the chat box at any time. Questions will be answered throughout the presentation. Before I hand things over to Dennis, I'd like to share some information on his background. For over 27 years, Dennis has been in the insurance industry, beginning his career as a private investigator, specializing in investigating fraudulent insurance claims against employers. He then spent over 10 years prior to becoming an insurance agent, working as a multi-line claims adjuster with a primary focus on workers' compensation claims. He is currently an insurance agent working with small to middle market businesses. He is a graduate of Western Illinois with a degree in criminal justice. In addition, he has attained his associate in risk management, associate in claims, and his senior claims law associate, and a chartered property casualty underwriter. He has specialized in the design, marketing, and implementation of a client-oriented insurance program. He also provides an expertise in applying the appropriate resources to help his clients contain cost by managing their exposure to risk. His clients include manufacturers, social service agencies, distributors, contractors, and others. Mr. Powers has been with Lamb Little and Company since March of 2009. He lives with his wife, Jill, and one child, AJ, in Mount Prospect, Illinois. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dennis to start the presentation.
Thanks, Dawn. I appreciate that. To everybody, Dawn gave the introduction. You see another photo, Gary Klina. He's my partner over here. I've been working with the Home Instead Network since 2010. I got Gary involved with the helping me build a home healthcare team probably 7 or 8 years ago. So he kind of pursues different franchises. I'm pretty loyal to the Home Instead group. This presentation you're about to see is a presentation I've been doing since 2008. This is an updated version. I'm going to go do a deep dive. I'm going to give you your money's worth. I think Dawn said she charged you $500 each to be on this webinar. I'm kidding. But this is a presentation I did where I met the first Home Instead. I didn't know anything about home health care, companion care. I didn't know about Home Instead, Comfort Keepers right at home. I was just doing these presentations because workers' compensation is typically a number 2, number 3, number 4 expense for most employers. It's tied in directly with payroll. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I was doing a presentation, and it was either late 2009, early 2010. And it was maybe about 50 or 60 attendees at an occupational health clinic. And there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Cook, who sold his franchise 3 or 4 years ago, but he just had gotten non-renewed. He had some legitimate claims. I just happened to be doing a seminar at his occupational health clinic. He came to it. I ended up helping him out. He introduced me to Mike Mellinger, who is someone I still talk to. And Mike suggested taking a show on the road and trying to meet more owners. So now I currently work with between 90 to 100 Home Insteads all throughout the country. The presentation we're doing now is a follow-up to a presentation we did about a month ago for the network. It is true, I was a private investigator. I wanted to be a police officer. I'm 51 years old. I turned 51 in November. I graduated from college in 1993. There was a window from 1991 to about 95 where it was very challenging to become a police officer. I did ride-alongs for a whole semester with a local police department. They had 1,100 people apply for 3 openings. It was kind of like that for 4 or 5 years. So I had to do a full semester internship. I did it in the winter, spring of 1993, and I drove around the country, pretty much east of the Mississippi. I was in a full-size van with tinted windows, had a bed in the back. I drove all over the country, primarily the east and the southeast. So I spent a lot of time in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Mississippi, and I did almost all work comp fraud. So my mom worked in HR for an insurance company. I thought, I'm getting burnt out. I'm working 90 hours a week as a private investigator. I'm probably making less than minimum wage. I did turn that into a job. Almost everyone I followed was fraudulent. You know, back then, nobody knew about people like me. So I had a job offer. I had two job offers. One to work for Motorola undercover. I was going to bounce around from all their different plants, and I was going to report on drug use and employee theft. Then I had a job offer to work for an insurance carrier. So I took the job with the insurance carrier, I investigated claims, and I just realized when I got into sales, this is such a big expense for all of you. I want to do a deep dive into this. And I just wanted to give you a little more of a thorough background than from the bio that Dawn gave you. So with that being said, please ask questions real time. We'll try to answer them as they go on. You'll see Lamb Little here. I was a majority shareholder at Lamb Little up until last December of 2021. We merged with InZone out of California. So eventually the Lamb Little name will be gone. I'm now a minority shareholder of InZone. So that's why you see Lamb Little powered by InZone. So Dawn, if you want to advance the slide, please. So this is a two-part presentation. Again, I'm going to do a deep dive. Every slide is as important as the other. This first half of the presentation is more about understanding your experience rating, understanding how to properly report claims, understanding how insurance carriers use different rates to get to a premium that they're comfortable with. So these are the things we're going to talk about the first half of the presentation. A little bit of a deeper dive than I've done in years. I feel like I shortchanged people when I've done this presentation live for the HCAOA or as a webinar. We usually try to do it within an hour, so I had to cut slides out. Dawn's recording this. Dawn is going to post this on the website. So if you can't make it through the whole thing, please revisit later and finish it because each slide is really important. So we'll start with this. We'll talk about premiums. Let's talk about experience rating. Let's talk about reporting claims properly. There's a couple of big takeaways from the beginning of the presentation. So Dawn, if you could advance to the next slide. I've actually added to this slide yesterday two things, and then another slide I added a third thing I wanted to talk about. Most of you on this call and most of the homesteads I've always worked with are in guaranteed cost programs. But there are some that might be on this call that are in a loss sensitive type program. So I kind of want to talk about the difference between the two, the pros and cons of each. But with the guaranteed costs, I added no financial rating of the carrier. So let me talk about that before I get to the difference between guaranteed cost and loss sensitive. Insurance carriers can choose not to be rated by AM Best and other rating services. I only work with A-rated carriers, A minus, A plus rated. I don't work with unrated carriers. I don't work with B-rated carriers. Several years ago, one of two work comp carriers called Guarantee Insurance went belly up. They didn't go belly up overnight though. They went belly up over the course of a year and a half. Prior to that, there was a carrier called Ulico. All they focused on was workers' compensation, both unrated. But with Guarantee, the most recent one, I know a lot of home insteads were insured by them. Because they were unrated, they had to give away their premiums. So they were probably more competitive. But in return, you lost the financial stability of that company, but also the service may not have been as good. What I want to share with you on this slide is it did not happen overnight. We knew for a year and a half that the wheels were starting to fall off for Guarantee Insurance. So I think I only had two clients with them, moved them early on, didn't want anything to do with them. But I heard when they went under, which I think was right before COVID, there were a lot of home insteads scrambling to replace coverage. So it's really important to understand what is the rating of your carrier, okay? So now guaranteed cost versus loss sensitive. A loss sensitive program is not common with this industry. I think I know of two captives. Loss sensitive means you're taking on more risk, but the reward is you'll pay less overall barring catastrophic claims. So I know of a captive in the Southeast, and I know of a captive in the Northeast. And essentially what a captive is, you take, let's say you take 10 homesteads, you pool all those premiums together. And based upon your loss history and the other 9 people's loss history, you're probably going to have a lower premium than a traditional insurance program. How, okay, that's the positive to it. And if no one in the group has losses, you're going to come out ahead. Here are the problems with it and the reason why I've never pursued it after all these years. And believe me, I've done a lot of research, I've thought about it. The way a captive works is you need letters of credit. You need to actually, tie up some money to be able to fund this mechanism. But the biggest thing is you share in other people's losses. So if you have a big claim in a captive, you're going to pay more first and foremost in a traditional insurance program, but then other people in the captive are going to be paying for your loss as well. Okay. So typically there's higher deductibles there. Not a fan. I just would never put someone in the captive knowing that you cannot control the other people in the captive. So if they have a big loss, everyone's paying for it. So let's advance to the next slide, please, Don. So guaranteed cost, again, which is most of you on this call, let's say you're paying $50,000 a year to the work comp carrier. They're on the hook for all of your claims. There's no limitations to your work comp policy. And I added, there are no limits to part 1 of your work comp policy. This is very important to understand. You could pay $15,000 a year for your workers' comp. You could have a claim for $4 million. Your work comp carrier will pay $4 million. There's no limitations to that part of the work comp policy, which is the core part. People get, they see there's a second part to the work comp policy called employer's liability. There are limits for that. And in a nutshell, I've never seen it happen before. Okay. I don't know if I ever will, but essentially the best example I could have is if you sent a caregiver to a client's home and they were not properly trained and something happened because they were not properly trained where they sue your client, not you, they sue your client. And then your client, through their own due diligence, realizes that you did not properly train them. They bring you into the lawsuit. Employer's liability defends you for something like that. So maybe an example would be, your employee doesn't have the proper PPE during COVID. They get COVID from your client, they sue your client. And then your client says, well, if they had a proper PPE, this would never happen. They bring you into a lawsuit. Again, I've never seen a claim. But the biggest takeaway from this slide is there's no limits to your work comp policy. So if you see 500,000, see $1 million, that's not workers' comp. That's part 2, the employer's liability. Never seen a claim for that before. Next slide, please. So the good about guaranteed cost is if you have, if you're paying $15,000 a year, that's your exposure. You don't pay more than that. If they've got a $4 million claim, no worries. But if you don't have any claims, you're not getting any money back. That $15,000 you're going to keep, and you're not going to see a return on that. Okay. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get a little more technical here. I think the back half of the presentation is good for you as owners, but also your staff. The front half, where we're going to dive into now, is a little more technical. It's more for the person who handles the workers' comp. We're going to talk about the 3 factors that really drive your premiums up or down. And in this situation, we're going to talk about how you're classified and the rates that go along with that, your experience rating, and we're going to talk about the ability for carriers to add credits or debits. So this slide here, if you pull your work comp policy, they call this the declaration page. This is the page that has your payrolls. You see under exposure, shows a rate, and you probably have a page like this in your work comp policy. So this is modeled to look like that. Next slide, please, Don. So we're going to talk about how you're classified, definitions, and rate. So when I met Bob in late 2009, 2010, this, where it says home, public, and traveling healthcare, it was actually a manufacturer. I didn't know a damn thing about home healthcare. I didn't expect Bob to be there. In fact, when I met him, I was very hesitant in helping him with his insurance because I didn't know how to insure a home instead franchise. I knew how to insure a contractor. I knew how to insure a manufacturer. After I met Mike Mellinger, he was very supportive of me, and so was Bob. And I met more and more owners, and I really went all in with the National Private Duty Association, which is now the Home Care Association of America, and Home Instead. And most of my business is either or with those two different groups. So I've changed the presentation where I've highlighted in yellow what they call the governing class code. This is what distinguishes you from another type of employer, retail, distribution, contracting. But you'll see salesperson, clerical, those are the same class codes for a home instead as it would be for a contractor, as it would be for a commercial painter. Okay, here's what's important takeaway from this presentation. I often, almost every time I meet a new home instead, most owners exclude themselves from the policy. And here's one I'll go to the next slide in a second, but I believe most owners would be classified as clerical. That's how it's historically been since 2010. With COVID, I have seen owners in desperation have to go out and caregive. I've seen owners have office staff go out and caregive. If that happens or has happened to you or could happen to you, that payroll will go in the home health care bucket. So if you have someone who worked in your office 95% of the year, but for 2 weeks they worked as a caregiver, all of that payroll would go towards the 8835. So next slide, Donna, I'll explain why that's important. So each class code has a specific definition. So they lump you in with skilled care, home health care. There's more similarities between home health care, skilled care, and companion non-skilled care than there are differences. So here's a definition of that. So this would be where all your caregivers payroll would go into. Next slide, please. So what's important to know is with each of those 3 different class codes we talked about, there is an applicable rate that goes along with that. So this is an old slide. I'd say the average rate nationwide is probably between $3 to $4 an hour. I mean, at one point in California, it was like $15 every $100 of payroll. I've seen, and now I think it's down to under 10. But in Arizona, Indiana, we're talking maybe under $1. Illinois, probably an average is about $2. New York is probably, I'd say 3 to 4, but it used to be $5 to $6. So all that payroll for that office worker or the owner, if they're included on the policy, if they went out and caregived, all that payroll will go under the 8835 bucket. So next slide, please, Don. So when I'm working with a home instead and any other agent, we're asking you to estimate what you think your payrolls are going to be for the upcoming year. So in this situation, we're using $1 million of payroll under exposure. Here are your 3 different class codes, and look at the difference in the rates. So I try to convince owners to think about including yourself on the work comp policy if you're going to be classified as clerical or if you're going to be classified as salesperson. Because look how low that rate is. We're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars, to include you in the policy. And the reason why I think that's important is in the history of working with the network, I have seen 2 owners that were excluded. Again, that was their knee-jerk reaction. I need to exclude myself from the policy. Okay, one of them was lifting a box of copy paper and he threw his back out. And he turned it into his health insurance. But when he went to the doctor, he said, I was at the office, moving copy paper around, hurt my back. Well, his health insurance carrier declined to cover the claim because it was a work comp claim, which is on every intake form at any medical facility. Was this an auto accident? Was this a work comp claim? So he had no coverage either way for that claim. He was declined both. Well, he wasn't declined from work comp. He was never included. Then there was another situation where an owner had a car accident and it was going to see a potential client. And that claim did get through to the health insurance, but his copay slash deductible was thousands of dollars more than it would have cost to have him on the policy. So food for thought, think about it. I mean, we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands, to include you, because you could be injured just like any of your staff could. Okay, one last important piece here is we're going to talk about NCCI in a minute. There's a question. Can I see? My broker indicates hey, Dan from Alabama. My broker indicates we must include our social workers who go out of the office to visit clients must be classified as sales. I would agree that that's probably correct. Dan and anyone else, the minute your employee leaves the office, they're no longer clerical because there's more exposure out there, primarily auto accidents, slip and falls, trip and falls, visiting somebody. So when they're in the office, it's really got to be 100% of the time. They will be clerical. But yeah, if they're in the office 90% of the time, but 10% of the time they're out visiting people, they're gonna move that payroll over to the outside salesperson bucket. Bill, I think I answered that one for Dan. Okay, so let me get back to the rates, which is really important. So one of the carriers that we recently started working with about 4 or 5 months ago directly is AmTrust. AmTrust is nationwide. Up until 3 or 4 months ago, me, like any other agent, had to go through a middleman, a wholesaler, to access AmTrust. So we were at the mercy of another agent, a wholesaler, that would get a quote from AmTrust. Now that I have AmTrust directly, and I think we're one of the few retail agents that have them directly, I can go on their website. I can go state to state. I can see the different rates they use. So most insurance carriers use a variety of rates. So if I have $5.02 here, let's say it's AmTrust, I can tell you right now that if I look up your class code 8835 in Tennessee, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rates for AmTrust. I'm looking at Tennessee, okay? Some are, and each is about 10% lower than the other. So that's how insurance carriers can get to a premium that they're comfortable with. So if I were to meet a home instead that was with Wesco, Wesco is under the AmTrust umbrella. Wesco is one of the highest rates under the AmTrust umbrella. I know of 3 rates that are 10%, another 10%, and another 10% less than that. Okay. But I have another insurance carrier called ClearPath. They're in right now 5 or 6 states. They only use 1 rate. Okay. So you need to know, are you getting the best rate? So I can go on AmTrust website any given moment and I can see what their rates are. And I like them, but I meet people, I'm like, man, you're paying 30% more than your neighbor. Why is that? So again, it's not to fault the agent, it's the sub-agent, the wholesaler, that really is the agent of record with that carrier. So it's just always important to understand that part of it. Dawn, next slide, please. So this will show you how your manual premiums, this is your baseline, okay? This is your estimated payroll. Now, the one thing that you can do, which is kind of a more common thing now than it used to be in the past, is more and more insurance carriers are letting your payroll provider, which for most of you is PayPlus, go on an AmTrust website, a ClearPath website, Guard, whoever it is, and upload your payrolls, and you pay based upon your actual payrolls. Doesn't cost anything to do it for the most part. But that way is great for peaks and valleys. I mean, I have a Midwestern home instead that lost 2 24-hour clients within a week. So there's gonna be a drastic reduction in revenue and payroll. But she is on a monthly reporting platform. So the peaks and valleys are all kind of sorted through by the payrolls going in versus estimating. So I would say most of my clients actually do it that way versus estimating. People that estimate, there's 1 or 2 reasons they usually do it that way. They do it because they want to know, they want to budget, they want fixed monthly installments. or some owners are not comfortable with an insurance carrier going into their checking account and taking money out, because that's usually how it works. So those are usually the two reasons why someone wouldn't do that. I highly encourage it, but if you don't want to do it, the solution is 6 months into your policy, go back to your agent and say, hey, listen, I know we said $1 million for caregiver payroll, but I'm trending towards $1.3 million. Can we make a change now? Because in that way, when the audit happens, you will have already taken care of that increase versus getting hit with a big bill, at the end of the, after the policy's over. Any questions on that? We're gonna move on to the EMOD. Dawn, next slide, please. Okay, so that was the first big factor, rates, okay? Now keep in mind that NCCI that developed your experience rating, they also developed suggested rates. So a lot of insurance carriers, including AmTrust, will use the suggested rate from NCCI, but then they could file their own rates higher and lower. That gives them flexibility to use different rates to get to the premium they want to get to, okay? Now we're going to talk about the experience rating. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive, but some huge takeaways here. Now, keep in mind, when I was in claims in the 90s, the most miserable professional experience of my life was being a claim adjuster. You don't go to school to become a claim adjuster. I grew up in Chicago, in the city. I would see a police car drive by, I would run up to them and wave. People want to be cowboys, they wanted to be firemen, they wanted to be doctors. Nobody wants to be a claim adjuster, okay? But when I was a claim adjuster, I very, very rarely had any contact with the underwriters that actually put the pricing together. I mean, maybe I can count on one hand in 10 years the amount of times an underwriter came to me. And I certainly was never shown an NCCI experience rating, which is used in 38 of the 50 states. This is something you have a lot of control over. And you'll see in this example, it's a 1.17 experience rating. In this example, it's almost costing this person $9,000 of additional premium just because of the experience rating, okay? So next slide, please, and we'll do a little deeper dive into it and give you some excellent takeaways, hopefully. So the spirit behind the experience rating, and again, this is universal in all 50 states. It may not look like this in the other 12 states that don't use NCCI, but like Wisconsin does not use NCCI, but their EMOD looks exactly like this, in terms of the formula, how they use it. Most states use the same formula. So the idea here is, let's reward and punish people. Let's reward, Dan from Alabama. We're gonna reward Dan because Dan is making an effort to bring injured caregivers back to work with restrictions. Dan is doing training, using Hoyer lifts. He's doing whatever he can to prevent claims from happening. If Dan is doing all those things, then he's likely going to have smaller claims or no claims at all. He'll have an experience rating under a 1.00. He's going to get a credit. Unfortunately, and honestly, I have met owners over the years. Hey, Dennis, I can't be bothered with any of this stuff. Tell me what I owe. Let me write a check and I'm just going to hope for the best. Well, for those people that aren't doing the things that Dan are doing, they're going to have bigger claims. They're not going to be taking people back to work when they have restrictions, and they're going to have a 1.17 or higher. So if you could see the cursor at the bottom, that's the end result is the EMOD. And again, that's multiplied by your manual premium, which we established as your base in the first part of the presentation. Okay. Dawn's getting into the action too with her yeah, your cursor. My cursor works, but I guess it doesn't work for you all. Okay. So essentially, this is a snapshot of 3 years of loss experience. So when you have a claim, it's not going to affect you year 1. It's going to affect you year 2, year 3, year 4. Then it's going to drop off. Okay. It can impact you the first year if the underwriter's like, wow, they've had a lot of claims. We're going to non-renew these people, or we're going to ask for a big increase. Yes, that can happen, but in terms of your experience rating, you won't see it until the second year. And the reason being is it takes a long time for a claim to develop. So in the first year in the life of a claim, the reserves are going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. So it's not fully matured yet. And it, isn't necessarily fully matured after the first year, but it's more mature. Then that data and with your audited payrolls and your actual losses get sent in to NCCI or a different bureau in California, a different bureau in Massachusetts. But again, same spirit. Let's reward punish. Okay. In some states, though, like Massachusetts, not only do they, if you have a lot of claims, do they hit you with the experience rating, but that only a handful of states do this, but Massachusetts is one of them. They actually do what they call, it's called an ARAP. It's almost like a punishment up to 25% more. They can say, we're going to add another 10 to 25% on top of your experience rating, which is unusual. It's not like that the rest of the country, but it is something that can happen. So another reason to try to prevent claims from happening. Okay, so next slide, please, Dawn. So what we're going to do over these next couple of slides is we're going to take that experience rating, we're going to break it up into 3 sections so I can kind of do a little deeper dive. Again, I haven't done this until maybe about a couple months ago when I recorded a presentation. I cut a lot of these slides out, but there's such big takeaways from this that I want to go over. Okay, so I'm going to break this up into year by year. So what we've done with these 2 lines is we've broken it up year by year. And I know these dates are old, and I'll explain why I left it the way it is. It's really important. But look at that 5,000. You see the 5,000 in column 10? We're going to come back to that in a second. Next slide, please, Dawn. By the way, we couldn't figure out the sharing thing, so Dawn's my wingwoman on this one. We make a great team. And in fact, I'm going to have Dawn do the second half of the presentation. Okay, Dawn? So what we're doing here, now we're drawing a line down the middle, and we're going to separate where they calculate what they think your losses are supposed to look like, which is the left side of the experience rating sheet. So if you could see where it says policy total 5,362,000, that's your audited payrolls from that year. So 8835 is caregiving, 8742 is sales, 8810 is clerical. Those are the actual audited payrolls from that year. Okay, so it's important for you as an owner, because trust me, what happens is this data is sent in from a variety of insurance carriers to NCCI or the other bureaus. And if someone mistypes, if they miss the 0 on that 8835, instead of 3 million of caregiver payroll, it's 300,000 of caregiver payroll. What they're doing on the left side of the experience rating, maybe advance to the next slide, Dawn, please. What they're doing in section A is they're determining, based upon your audited payrolls, what your expected losses are supposed to be. So you'll see in section C at the bottom, these are your expected losses. Section B at the top, actual, those are your actual losses. So let's go to the next slide, and you'll see they just divide the two, and it's how they come up with your experience rating. So the left side of the EMOD is the audit, the audited payrolls. Okay, so halfway through all of your policies. So let's say Dan, I'm going to pick on Dan until someone else asks a question. Let's say Dan's policy starts on January 1st. July 1st, all of his work comp carriers are going to send in what they call a stat card. It's going to have the audit with all the payrolls, but it's also going to have the actual losses as well. Okay, based upon the payrolls, they're going to come up with what they think the losses should look like. Okay, so if you can go and if you look at that slide compared to the premium summary sheet, it looks very similar. You have the class codes, you have the payrolls. Okay, what you're looking for, each one of you and anyone else who watches this presentation, check out those payrolls. If there's an error, I had said earlier, if that 0 was missing, the expected losses are a lot lower than they should be because you're using 300,000 of caregiver payroll versus 3 million. It does happen. There are services that will, for free, they'll do an audit. And if they find errors, what they do is they give you the data and you send it to the insurance carrier. And if the insurance carrier agrees they made a mistake, they'll resend a revised stat card to NCCI. They'll make an adjustment. And what happens is you get 50% of what you get back, then the auditor gets 50% of what, of the remainder. So take it upon yourself. If you see an error, the solution is to go through the insurance carrier, keep all your money, and just have them make the correction. But you go through the carrier, not the agent. You go maybe through the agent, through the carrier to NCCI. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about some big takeaways here. So the left, now we're on the right side, section B. These are your actual losses. What they do here is they actually itemize each claim, unless it's a medical only claim under $2,000. Okay, so otherwise, so this person had 23 medical only claims, each under 2,000. Okay, next slide, please, Don. So here are loss runs. So whenever I'm quoting somebody, I need the experience rating. That's the first thing that every underwriter looks at. It tells a story, but it doesn't flesh out things. The loss runs flesh out the losses. So on the EMOD worksheet, you're not going to see the name of the person, description of what happened. You're not going to see a breakdown of the reserves. You're going to see the total incurred, which is the reserves plus what's been paid so far. Okay, so this really gives more details that you don't get off the experience rating worksheet. So here is takeaway number one from the first slide of the presentation. Every state has a waiting period before a worker is entitled to what they call temporary total disability, which is also known as indemnity. Indemnity, you'll see here. Indemnity could be two things. It could be a permanent settlement to an injured worker, or it could be lost wages, also known as temporary total disability or temporary partial disability. Okay, so in Illinois, the waiting period is 3 days. In a lot of other states, it is 7 days. So legally, neither you nor the insurance company in Illinois is responsible for paying the first 3 missed days, unless the worker misses more than 14 consecutive days. If they miss, or if they are going to be known to miss more than 14 days, the insurance carrier will pay those 3 days up front. Okay. In a state where it's usually a 7-day waiting period, usually it's 21 days before they're entitled to that. This is why it's such an important takeaway. So one of the first owners I ever met, he had 3 claims that were technically lost time claims because people missed a day, 2 days, 3 days of work. Okay, it was in the Midwest. But by law, he didn't know that there was a waiting period. So on each of those 3 claims, his staff reported those claims as lost time claims. In fact, on the intake form you fill out that goes to the carrier, it says, is this a lost workday case? His knee-jerk reaction was yes, yes, and yes, and his staff to that answer. But the answer should have been no, 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 because by law, he wasn't responsible. Why is this so important? In majority of the United States, I'm talking like almost every state at this point, medical only claims are discounted by 70% in terms of how they impact your experience rating. Okay, so when he reported those 3 claims to his staff as lost time claims, he lost that discount immediately. And you can't go back. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Okay, but my recommendation to you all is report those claims as medical only. And over time, if the person's going to miss more than what your waiting period is, by the way, I have a little cheat sheet. You'll see later most of the states' waiting periods. You can always call the carrier and say, you know what, we need to reassign this to a lost time indemnity adjuster. Then you'll lose the 70%, but not upfront. I mean, because 2 of those 3 claims for that owner had a lot of medical treatment. So his premiums went through the roof and they were medical only claims. Okay, that's takeaway number 1. But also on that first slide, I talk about paying those small claims out of pocket. So I had an owner, it was a manufacturer though, but it wasn't a home instead. One of their workers cut his finger on a machine and it cut deep to the bone. So she was paying less than 10,000 for all of her insurance, a real small screw manufacturer. This is takeaway number two about not self-paying claims. Now knowing there's a 70% discount. He goes to the emergency room. I think it was like almost a $2,000 bill because I mean, of course, they're going to do an X-ray, $2,000 claim against policy. It was medical only, but still, it had an impact on the experience rating a little bit. So we did the math. If that claim would have been reported as a medical only claim versus being paid out of pocket, so that owner paid $2,000 out of their own pocket to not report the claim. Had that claim been reported to the insurance policy, each year that claim would have been on the experience rating, which is again 3 years. It would have been $100 of additional premium each of the 3 years. So a total of $300 of additional premium over the course of 3 years versus $2,000 out of pocket. So keep that in mind when you're reporting claims. You know, I have a lot of our clients call me and say, how should we report this? We talk it through. It's that simple. 2 huge takeaways. And again, this slide here really shows you more details about when the claim happened, when it was reported. Okay, next slide, please, Don. So here's an important section. IJ is injury code OF, open final. Again, I'm doing a deeper dive. This presentation is going to go a little bit longer than it normally does because I want you to understand this. I mean, to make you dangerous enough to really take more control over your experience rating and your negotiating tactics with your agent. So 6 in most states is medical only. So when you report the claim, when your answer is no, is this a lost workday case? It goes in and it's coded as a number 6. Number 5 is the most common after medical only, which is temporary total disability. That means the worker's missing work is going to be paid 2/3 of their average weekly wage, no taxes, and that's classified as a 5. There's like, you know, there's a code for death. I think there's 8 or 9 codes, but these are the 2 most common. So again, if you report that claim as medical only, it shows up as a 6. But if you report it as lost work time, it's going to be a 5, and you'll lose that 70% discount. In fact, if you look at your experience rating worksheet, usually the bottom left-hand corner, it will say medical only claims are discounted by 70%. That's how you'll know if your state, like a good example would be Missouri. Missouri now does that, but 5 years ago they didn't. So there was no distinction between medical only and lost time cases. Okay, next slide, please. I'm gonna try to get over this in the next couple minutes. So now we're back to the loss runs. Now we're back to, you know, a difference between medical only and indemnity. And insurance carriers do monitor when an injury happened and when it was reported. So you'll see here, it took 33 days to report this claim, 77 to report this claim after they found out about it. And trust me, I'll get a call from the underwriter saying, hey, what gives? The sooner we get into the claim, the more control we can have over it, which we'll talk about the second half of the presentation. Next slide, please. Here are your actual losses. So this is what you're actually seeing from those loss runs. Keep in mind that they only include indemnity and medical. They don't include other expenses like legal fees. They don't surveillance, things like that. So let them fight the good fight. Let them spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defending you if they win, because it's not going to affect your experience rating. It's the medical bills, it's the lost wages, it's the settlements. That's what impacts you the most. Next slide, please. We're almost done with the EMOD. But for me, another thing to understand is that when a claim is turned in to an insurance carrier, you report those. I never report claims because they ask for a lot of information, social security number, birth date, things like that I would never have. As an agent, 9 times out of 10, maybe 95 out of 100 times, I do not know that you reported a work comp claim to the insurance company. So that means your agent likely is in the same boat as I am. If you report a claim, we won't know until you tell us. So with my claims experience, I advocate for the people I work with but only if I know there's a claim to advocate on. So, typically I see loss runs 90 days before the renewal. But the appropriate time, if you have open claims, is there's 2 times of the year. So again, I picking on Dan still, 'cause no one else has asked a question yet. Dan's policy renews on January 1st. His information is going into NCCI on July 1st. So what I would do in a perfect world, order loss runs sometime in April. Talk to Dan. Dan, you've got 2 open claims. Let's talk to the adjuster. Let's get these claims closed or get the reserves down. Okay. It gives us 2 months to go back and forth. And sometimes nothing happens. Other times we do get reserves down or we get claims closed. Then that new data is sent in a few months later, and it's lower reserves or closed claims. Dan's EMOD is going to be lower because of that. Okay. So that's the appropriate time to do it. It's no good to do it 7 months in, 8 months in. And then the other time is to get loss runs before you renew. And again, a lot of times I get surprised. I don't know about claims. Most of the time, people don't tell me about them. Next slide, please, Don. All right, here's the last part of the EMOD I want to talk about. Primary losses, actual primary losses. I told you earlier, remember why I said focus on the 5,000, okay? For more than a decade, the first 5,000 of every claim did the most damage. It went in the far left bucket, which we'll get to in a little bit, of the actual primary losses. Anything above the $5,000 was discounted, and there's a number on your experience rating. And this example is a 0.18. Anything above 5,000 is discounted by that amount. Okay. Over time, that number has crept up. Over a decade, it didn't move at all. And now I think it's over $18,000. It went, in small increments, but over time it goes up. So now more and more of that claim is impacting your experience rating, which in fact affects your overall insurance premiums. So another argument to why it's good to bring people back to work with modified duty. Don't let them be paid by the insurance carrier to have lost wages. If that happens, it's an indemnity claim. I've seen many people take injured workers back for weeks or months, and they're productive. They're actually doing something for the employer, but it stays as a medical only claim. So I just want you all to know that number has crept up year after year after year. So it's just that much more important to prevent these things from happening in the first place. Next slide, please. So this again is where, the $45,000 number, that's that first bucket, the first 5, now the first 18.5 of every claim. Then they have a stabilizing value in the middle. So you can't have a 0.00. And then anything above the 5,000 in this example is discounted. And they just divide your actual losses versus what you expect, section B from section A. Here's your EMOD. The lowest I've ever seen is a 0.69, and the highest I've seen, I've had a couple home insteads over a 2.0, which means they're paying, not only are they paying more than double for their work comp, but again, underwriters, they gravitate towards this first and foremost every single time because they see a number. If it's over 1.00, uh-oh. If it's under 1.00, something's going right. But maybe in this situation, it's just a couple of claims that are driving that. Next slide, please. So again, what can you do? A lot of insurance carriers offer loss control. One of the things I'm trying to do with Dawn and the association is put out blogs. We put a really good one out of something we're going to talk about in a few minutes, where I interviewed a couple of owners that are doing a post-offer medical questionnaire. I'm going to do one this Thursday with an owner who had a big fire the day before Thanksgiving, and she was willing to talk about it and how she wasn't prepared for it, never thought would happen to her. So I'm hoping to put content on the website to help you all with all of your insurance, but some insurance carriers have free loss control. And then, get involved in your claims. I'm not perfect. I can't get claims closed. I can't get people to always react. I can't monitor every claim for every person, but I do my damnedest. I try to hold not only the insurance adjuster accountable, but also the owner. as well. Next slide, please. I think we're now on the back half after this. Oh, well, actually, one last thing. We covered 1 and 2, but scheduled credit and debits. There's another way besides rates that a carrier can get more aggressive in their pricing by adding credits, or can add debits to get to a premium that they're comfortable with, which I don't see that happen. I actually don't see either happen too often, but if I do, it's going to be credits. But a lot of times it's going to be the rate. They're going to hang their hat on the rate that they use. But know that, like in Tennessee, the most insurance carriers can file for credits is 25%. That's the most they can apply to be more aggressive. They can't apply 50%. I might see 10% once in a while, 15%. It's usually rate driven, but that's another way to control those rates up and down. Next slide, please. Any more questions? So, I mean, we've gone almost an hour and we're through the first half of the presentation. I mean, I'm willing to keep going, and it could be another 20 to 30 minutes, but really good information, things are shareable. I can tell less stories. Dawn, what do you think? I mean, I know your time's valuable. But I really want to do a deep dive on this.
Yeah, you know what, Dennis, I think keep going. And then if people have to drop off for the meeting at the top of the hour, it'll be recorded, like you said, come back and watch.
Perfect.
As long as we wrap up by about 3:25 Eastern time.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Okay.
No problem.
Let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Keep us trained. I'm gonna take a drink. I'm gonna reward myself for a job well done for the first half. At least I think I did a good job. So now we're going to talk about things you can do after the injury happens, and maybe some things you can do to prevent injuries from happening. This part of the presentation, if you've got staff that are really engaged with, talking to the injured worker, reporting the claims, the rest of this presentation is what they should be watching, but you as well. Okay, so next slide, please. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about basic, I'll go quickly over the next slide, but we're going to talk about the basic benefits so you understand and how to find those benefits online. We're going to talk about investigating accidents, trying to prevent fraud, the importance of return to work programs, post-offer medical questionnaire we'll talk about very briefly, but that's the blog I did with Dawn that should be on the site. I did it a few weeks ago before Christmas with some people from the Charlotte office. Highly recommend you watch it. It's 18 minutes long. It addresses pre-existing conditions, but we'll talk about it near the end. Claim reviews, we kind of talked about that already. Nurse triage we'll talk about, and then injuries that happen before, during, after work. A lot of them happen in parking lots, but a lot of them happen when they're leaving the client's home or coming to it. Next slide, please. All right, so if any of you like, all right, well, Bill's on here. So Bill Michigan's on this presentation, I believe. So if Bill wanted to know what the core benefits are for an employee, I think it's very important for an owner and any staff that talks to the injured worker when they're injured to Google Massachusetts Workers' Compensation Commission, Dan, Alabama Workers' Compensation Commission. There will be a tab for employers, there'll be a tab for employees where you could look up the work comp benefits. But let me give you the universal benefits really quickly. The more you can tell the injured worker, the less likely they're going to leave the office and be scared about what's going to happen next, okay? Medical benefits. As far as I know, in all 50 states, now I haven't handled a claim in Hawaii or Alaska, but there is no co-payment, there's no co-insurance for your injured worker. The work comp carrier is going to pay the bills. They'll negotiate the bills down. They're gonna pay those. Okay. Temporary total disability. This is the big one. This is what distinguishes a medical only claim from an indemnity claim. Okay. So if you have a worker who's going to miss more than the waiting period, if you know if they fractured a kneecap when they slipped and fell, they tore their shoulder up. If it's a no-brainer, turn that claim as an indemnity claim, because you want to get them paid. What happens is the work comp carrier is going to reach out to you or your staff and say, can you provide 52 weeks worth of wages pre-injury? They'll take those 52 weeks, They'll add them together, divide by 52, and they'll come up with what they call the average weekly wage. Then they will pay 2/3 of that, no taxes. So if there's any deductions for garnishments, for 401k, they don't get involved in that. They just pay 2/3 of the average weekly wage, again, not taxed. Temporary partial disability. I mentioned this a little earlier in the presentation. This is where you can really control the cost of the claim, where you may not be able to bring the worker back to the full hours or full wages, but you might be able to meet somewhere in the middle. Well, temporary partial disability is meant to bridge the gap between full wages and temporary total disability. Okay. I hate when I meet an owner that is trying to appease the insurance company by taking a worker back to work that sits in the office and does nothing. I hate that. You're better off just letting them stay at home. Okay. You're just wasting money. But it does affect the overall cost of the claim, which affects your experience rating. But what if you could have them be a caregiver assistant? What if you could reassign them to another client? What if they can come in the office and do some work that you benefit from? It may not be 40 hours. Let's just use 40 hours a week as an example. It may be 15 hours a week. And maybe you're paying that caregiver $12 an hour. You're going to now pay them $10 an hour. What happens is you pay them what you're going to pay them. You submit that to the insurance carrier. They'll pay 2/3 the difference. Again, no taxes, no garnishments, between the pre-injury wage and then what you're paying them. So it bridges that gap. Okay. So that's kind of a solution to letting them sit at home, watch Ellen on TV, eat bonbons, see these commercials for attorneys, and then lose their motivation to return to work. You're keeping them invested in the company, maybe not the full wages, full hours, but if they refuse that and you make a bona fide job offer in writing, if they refuse that, nobody has to pay them. Okay, so keep those in mind when you're working on that. Permanent partial disability, it would be if a worker has a permanent injury. Let's say they damage their shoulder, helping a client when they fall and they tear their rotator cuff. They might be entitled to a settlement. That's part of the indemnity. And then penalties, I don't see it too often, but it can happen. To use an employer, or usually the insurance company, the adjuster, not so much the employee. If you as an employer sit on a claim and don't report it for a long time, you could be penalized for that. If an insurance adjuster does the same thing, or they don't get back to someone in a timely fashion, they're not paying the benefits quick enough, they could be penalized as well. So those are 4 core. You go state to state, they're going to have the same kind of thing. Now they're, what they might pay maximum minimum for their temporary total disability for settlements will differ, but these 4 core benefits are universal. Again, just Google Indiana Workers' Compensation Commission. Always do commission at the end, and you'll find somewhere on there. And again, I have a little cheat sheet you'll see. I think the next slide, actually, please, Dawn. Here we go. One back. Here we go. I think I have this little cheat sheet for maybe 2/3 of the states. Again, I wish I worked with a Hawaii home instead or an Alaskan home instead. I'd love to go visit them, and hopefully Enzo would pay for that. But in this situation, here's an example of North Carolina. So they have a 7-day waiting period before the worker's entitled to any lost wages. 21-day. If they're off for more than 21 days, they get that. So if you again offline, anything any part of this presentation you want to talk more about, reach out to me. I can send a copy of this to you, and anything else we're going to talk about here moving forward. Next slide, please, Don. And actually, these will move pretty quick now, everybody. Freeze the facts. Okay, as a claim adjuster, often stories changed, relationships changed, memories faded over time. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll give all of these to you if you want them. It's a kit. It has home instead on there. You can change it any which way you want to. I got all 4 of these. Let's have people that are witnesses, the actual employee, a coworker. After an incident happens, please have them fill out one of these forms. Please, and more importantly, go to the site of the accident, especially if it's a slip and fall, trip and fall, take photos or have someone from your staff do that. Build up as much as you can, okay? Next slide, please, Dawn. Here is, boy, I've had this form for a long time and I give it out, I love it. This is a form the actual worker fills out in his or her own words. And it really freezes the facts and locks in their version of what happened. Because as a claim adjuster, so many times people would change how they were hurt, or, oh, now my neck hurts, but I never mentioned that 3 months ago. Or the way I was injured has changed versus how it did when I first reported this. This holds them accountable. They sign it, okay? Next slide, please, Dawn. So I have this in Spanish, I have it in Polish, just so someone can't say they got something was lost in translation. I have as a kit, happy to send it to any of you. And you could change the Word documents. So again, nothing lost in translation. Next slide, please, Don. This one's really meant for supervisors, foremen, foremen, not for a home instead, but supervisors or anyone else who was involved in a process. Maybe it's a supervisor, someone in-house who talked to the worker in person over the phone. And again, their version of what happened. Unfortunately, I've had situations where a supervisor left and then they didn't leave on great terms and they were a hostile witness. I would very much want to have this documented in their version when they were a happy camper versus them, trying to screw you over down the road, which I've seen happen, unfortunately. So have this filled out by anyone that they can. Next slide, please. And then this would be a witness. I mean, a true story, very important story, ties in with why you should go out and interview a client if they are of sound mind and can be interviewed, or any other witness. And I'll go to a scene and take a photo. One of the New York home insteads had a situation where he had a newer employee, kind of a problematic employee actually, who was maybe working for a week, and she alleged that she slipped and fell on a loose rug, okay? I was disappointed in the staff of the home instead that they didn't talk to the client, who was of sound mind, and they didn't go to investigate, take photos of what happened. But I was also upset with my insurance adjuster, who also didn't ask those questions, because what we later found out was that client did not see a fall happen, and that freaking rug was glued. I wasn't almost going to say that other F word, but I was so frustrated. That rug was glued to the ground. It wasn't going anywhere. We could have disputed that claim, denied that claim because of the witness form, but also proof that that rug was glued to the floor. Instead, it was a $30,000 claim. She racked up the medical bills and lost wages. She lawyered up. It was a disaster. So I was really disappointed on both ends. Next slide, please. Now, this is something that may not be practical for everybody, but the spirit of it, I want to explain what I'm trying to accomplish here. The problem with your staff is most of your caregivers, well, all of them are off-site. They may come in once a week, once a month, but they don't come in daily. But if you're a manufacturer, if there's any way to implement something like this, the spirit of this is to have an employee daily, weekly, or monthly, preferably weekly, if this works, sign off in some version of this. It could be on the back of a paycheck. It could be an email from them, a text from them, ClearCare. I don't love it. It's better than nothing, but they have a telephone prompt. I had a safe work day. I was not injured at work. I don't think it holds up as well as something in writing from them. But if you're able to implement something where an employee can say, hey, I had a safe work week, too many times we've had weekend warriors get hurt at home, in a softball league, bowling league, moving furniture around. And then they come in on Monday morning and say they were hurt on Friday. If you can do something like this, and some owners have, but it may not be like this, but some version of this alone, when I was a claim adjuster, I didn't create this, someone else did. I was able to decline 2 claims, I remember, from having something like this. I've had this thing for decades, and it works better for people to have all their workers under one roof. When they're leaving for the day, they can sign off on it. but I have heard owners say there's ways to do this. So think about this. I have an example of this I can email as well. Next slide, please. We're really moving, folks. We'll probably be done in 10 minutes. Report your claims. Don't sit on them. Underwriters monitor that, but it just, the longer you don't report it, you've got an injured worker, or maybe they're not injured, maybe they're playing the game, playing the system, but they're not hearing from somebody about who's paying my bills, who's paying my wages. I don't know. I haven't heard from anybody. What are they going to do? They're going to lawyer up. They're going to go find an attorney who's going to get them the same stuff that they would have gotten anyways, but now the attorney's going to get a piece of it. Okay. And it really slows down the claim investigation. So next slide, please. For a year before I came to Lamb Little in 2009, I worked at Liberty Mutual when I converted over to sales, and they put this together for me. I've done this presentation since 2008, but if you would have seen the first time I did it, it wasn't impressive. Not to say this is impressive, but at least Liberty gave me this slide. It's still as relevant now as it was before. The longer you don't report a claim, the bigger the claim gets. And it's usually because of litigation and then the lack of control an adjuster can get on a claim. So next slide, please. Love your claim adjuster. I want to talk about, I mentioned earlier, it was a miserable experience, hands-on handling claims of any type. I handled claims from Marriott hotels, Bally's Total Fitness, JCPenney. The ones I liked were general liability claims. I enjoyed those. Workers' comp, everyone hated me. I mean, definitely the employee hated me because I handled claims that were questionable. They brought me in because of my criminal justice background. I was a pretty good interviewer, but here's what you need to know. How many claims does the adjuster have? I had over 200 claims when I was an adjuster, and it was way too much. I couldn't look at every claim every month. It was impossible, okay? When a new claim would come in, it probably took me 3 or 4 hours to get a claim set up, taking recorded statements, getting a hold of, I would call the 3-point contact. I would call you first, I would call the employee, then I would call the doctor in that order. Then it would take me hours to figure out, all right, how much money am I going to set aside in reserve, reserving process. So it's important to know, I think a healthy pending for an adjuster is just over 100 claims. They can look at every claim every month that way. But again, this is not something you go to school to become. There's a lot of turnover. I'm sure a lot of you have felt that. I've been disappointed more than I've been happy over the years with claim adjusters, which is why I try to advocate. But I'm also compassionate. I understand that they might have a lot on their plate. Again, financial rating the carrier. I forgot I actually had that on there. I guess I can, but what's important to know about that is when Guarantee Insurance, the wheels were falling off, they had adjusters quitting in droves. So you would have a new adjuster on each case every week. So if you've got a carrier that's going from an A+ to an A-, unrated, a B-rated carrier, there's a carrier called Mickham in the Southeast. We used to work with them. I think they were B-rated, B+ rated. Just important to know. It's not to say Mickham's not good what they do, but it's important to understand. And medical only versus indemnity. Just make sure you're reporting those the right way, and that you should have one dedicated person that does that, not 5. Okay, 1 point person for that. Special handling instructions. Maybe you can ask for an adjuster to tell you, hey, we're going to settle this claim. Hey, we're going to increase the reserves on this claim. Keep you involved. Like Massachusetts, picking on Bill again, you need Bill's permission to settle the claim. It's a unique thing to Massachusetts, maybe a couple of other states, but in Illinois and other states, the adjuster can do whatever they want to do. They don't need to talk to you again. So it doesn't hurt to ask for those types of things. Next slide, please, Dawn. Post-offer medical questionnaire. Let me go through this really quickly, but please, please, please watch the video that got posted last week with some owners, some staff from the Gastonia, North Carolina office. They've implemented this. Okay, the idea behind this is that I say in the blog, there's 3 types of claims I see commonly. Aggravations of pre-existing conditions, which are addressed with this, we're going to talk about for very briefly. Slip and fall, trip and fall claims are another one. And then the third one, I forget the third one. I just talked about this. Well, if you watch the blog, you'll see what it was. It was slips and falls, trips and falls, aggravations of patient handling. Patient handling. So many claims I've seen over the years have been aggravations of pre-existing conditions. Okay, so I've got 3 or 4 handouts for this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the next slide, please. This questionnaire, so that office that's on that blog, they use this questionnaire, and they've never had someone push back on it and not fill this out. And what you're trying to accomplish by doing this process of a post-offer medical questionnaire, again, you have to do it with everyone you made an offer to. And you'll see during the blog of how they've implemented it, how they explain it to people. You're looking for 3 outcomes, okay? Can I hire the person the way I want to hire them for this one client? Option 2, can I hire this person but modify what they can do based upon what kind of history they have here? Maybe I could put them with a different type of client. Or lastly, can't hire them at all. Okay, so those are the 3 outcomes. Again, please look at that blog. Next slide, please. Claim reviews. It's important just to be involved. When you do them, you should do them, 4 months before the stat card, 4 months into the policy. It should be you, the claim adjuster, and the agent on there. When I have a new claim that comes in, I'm made aware of it, that's going to be problematic. Within the first week, I've got a call between me, my home instead, and their staff, and the adjuster. From the first chance we can, we're on the same page. Now we got an email chain, everyone's accountable, and everyone's involved. Next slide, please. Nurse triage. The idea, we're almost done. I think we have 2 or 3 slides left. The idea behind nurse triage is, I think it's $85 a case, not a call, but a case. Coventry is someone we've been using that a lot of insurance carriers use, where before the claim gets assigned or a claim gets reported, we can get you set up with Coventry. They bill you directly. We don't get anything out of it. Some insurance carriers use them when you report a claim. The idea is before a claim is reported, you're talking to a nurse, you, your staff, and your injured worker. You're talking to a nurse. They're going through all these questions. They might stop you 3 questions in and say, you know what, Dan, you got to send that employee to the clinic. Or they might get all the way through. And what you're hoping happens 2 or 3 times out of 10. You're hoping the nurse says, you know what, it sounds like you have a soft tissue injury. Why don't you take some ibuprofen, ice it down. I'm going to call you back a day or 2 later, see how you're doing. And maybe it doesn't turn into a claim. So that's what the idea of nurse triage is to prevent all incidents from becoming full-blown claims. Okay. Again, I think it's $85 per case, not call. So if there's 3 or 4 calls, it's $85. Next slide, please. This is kind of the end. I think might be one of the last slides. Nationwide, I'd say majority of the country, your workers, your caregivers are considered traveling employees, which means if they're more likely to be covered for an injury in an auto accident on the way to and from work, in a driveway after they've clocked out, before they've clocked in. So I just want you all to know that I would never offer, if someone gets injured to and from work or after they've clocked out or before they've clocked in, I wouldn't volunteer work comp to those people. I'm telling you, if push came to shove with the state, they might say it's a compensable claim. Okay, that's what the ingress egress means. In like Tennessee, I think Tennessee, I had a worker injured. She just tripped on the sidewalk. There was a rock. She just tripped over she was clumsy, but it was covered because of the ingress egress laws of that state. Okay, again, another reason to go and take a photo of what happened. Surveillance in the parking lot, maintenance of a parking lot, just understanding. I've had claims where a worker, an office worker, knew she was about to be fired. and it was local to me actually. And her uncle was an orthopedic surgeon. She fabricated that she fell in the parking lot on a day like today where there was no snow, no ice. It was the parking lot was fine, no defects or whatever. We fought the claim because there was nothing wrong with it. It would have been better to have some video surveillance to prove that she never fell in the first place. All we could prove was there was nothing wrong with the parking lot, so they settled for a nuisance amount. Had they had some surveillance, they wouldn't settle for anything. They would have used that, and in fact, there was no defects to deny that. So if you don't have control over that, maybe you could talk to your landlord and install that. I also, I'm not against nanny cams at clients' homes. That's a little extreme, but it's that's where a lot of the injuries happen. And again, running errands while working, that counts too. I mean, that's always going to be covered. But like if a caregiver goes with you to Omaha in April and they're injured, it doesn't matter what they were doing. If they're traveling, they're covered. So you got to keep that in mind as well. Next slide, please. I think that was it. Again, I probably went 17 minutes longer than I normally did, but I wanted to go deeper. Did anyone have any more questions?
I didn't see any questions pop up in the chat. So, but is it okay if anyone has a lingering question? Do you want to?
Sure, absolutely.
Do they have your contact information?
I think if you go to the next slide, I think there's one more slide. Here's my email address.
Okay.
That photo, if you look at this guy, that photo is probably from when that bio was done, Don. That was probably 2010, 2011. A little heavier now. Metabolism doesn't work like it used to, but feel free to reach out. Any of those things I mentioned, I'll send to you. I'd love to share this information with other owners. I'd like to work with more home insteads in the network. So I'm pretty available. So just keep in touch. And again, if anything pops up now or an hour from now or 2 weeks from now, shoot me an email. And then I'm hoping to feed Don with more blogs down the road.
Yeah, that's great. And for anybody, like if you think of something a week from now, and you can't put your hands on Dennis's email address, just send an email to info@iaohif.com. That's the headquarters email, and I will send that information off to you or connect you to Dennis directly. But that's fantastic, Dennis. Thank you so much. I mean, we had 7 people hang on with us to the bitter end, so that's pretty.
It was a long one. I was afraid of that. It was a long one.
A lot of good information though. So I'm glad that, we've got it recorded now. So I'll send out the recording, probably either by the end of the week or right after the MLK weekend, depending on, how long it takes to just kind of edit some things. So it'll be available on the website. I'll send it out via email to those that to every member of the association. And I just want to thank Dennis for his time today, as well as last month. And I'm sure other things will crop up. We'll be able to do some more webinars with Dennis maybe later in the year. And yeah,
we'll do the blogs in the meantime, Don.
Exactly. And I'm going to be posting those blogs as soon as I get them. So appreciate everybody's time. And Dennis, thanks again. And hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.